Okay, let's get into making some rings. First, we're going to start with a round wire stacker ring. These rings are easier to make than bigger bands, so we'll start here to get the basic techniques down. We'll then build on these techniques later to give you everything you'll need for all of your ring making projects. Throughout this video, it's important to watch the demonstrations closely and go at your own pace. You can pause it, replay it, and practice yourself as we go along. Before we make any ring, we need to know what size we're aiming to make it. So if you're making it for yourself, you'll need to size up your desired finger. Use the blonde ring sizer to measure the size of your finger. The letters written along the sizer are the Australian and UK ring sizes, which is what we'll be using today. But if you'd like to convert that to another system, you can using the digital charts in our resources pack. Loop the flat tab into the arrow hole to create a circle. Then put it on your finger and pull the tab snug. Then give your hand a bit of a shake. For a comfortable size, you want the ring sizer tight enough so that it's not moving around when you shake your hand, but you can still take it off of your knuckle without too much trouble. The arrow on your sizer will be pointing you to a letter, which is your Australian and UK ring size. If you're stuck between two sizes and you're not sure which one to go for, we generally recommend going for the smaller or the tighter size because rings will be easier to stretch out later on than to shrink. If you don't have a sizer at home, you could drop into a local jewellery store to be measured up or use this at-home method. Start with a strip of paper. Wrap the piece of paper tightly around your desired finger. It needs to be super snug to your finger or you'll overshoot your size. Then grab a pen and mark where the paper overlaps. Then measure the length with a ruler. Then use that measurement with a blonde ring sizing chart to convert back into a ring size. If you're making the ring for someone else, you'll need their ring size. You can use the chart in our digital resources to help convert it if you need. Once we know what ring size our ring is going to be, we'll then mark the length of material we need on our metal wire using our dividers. To get this length measurement, use the charts in our digital resources to convert your ring size into a millimeter measurement. This is converting the circumference measurement of your finger into a length measurement for your wire, accounting for its thickness. To mark our size, we'll need our dividers and a ruler. To set your dividers to the correct length, I recommend holding them upright with one leg into the table that you're working on. Then simply slide the edge of your ruler against that leg, and we're going to be using this wheel on the side of our divider to adjust the length between our two little legs here. So I'm going to spin that until it's at the measurement that I need for my desired ring size. Once your dividers are all set, we're ready to transfer that measurement onto our piece of metal. All of your materials will be sent to you in a little blonde pouch, and for these thinner stacker rings, we'll be using the 2 pieces of sterling silver round wire, which I'm going to show you now. This is the round, thin silver wire that we'll be using. Just note it's the thinner, straight pieces of wire and not the bent grey wire here, because this is actually our solder, which we'll be using a little later on. Now our dividers are set, we're going to be making 2 little scratches on our piece of metal wire. It's really important that we leave 2 scratches on the piece so that in the following step, we've got 2 marks to cut through. To do so, it's really essential that you leave a little edge on each side of the wire and that you don't start from one side only. This is only going to leave you with 1 scratch, and remember we need 2. So we're going to be working in the middle of our metal here. Start by sticking one leg of your divider, making sure to leave an edge, into the table and holding it right at the top. Then steady the piece of silver using your non-dominant hand and slowly scratch the opposite end using the free leg. Then repeat the process by sticking this leg into the table and repeating on the opposite side. The scratches don't need to be deep, they just need to be visible. So after you've marked them, if you're having trouble seeing where they are, you can draw over the top of them with a Sharpie marker. These marks indicate how much metal we'll need for our desired ring size and where to cut through in the next step. Once we've marked our material, we'll then need to cut through each mark to leave us with the correct length of metal and 2 really bright, clean cuts. To do so, we'll be using our jeweler's saw, which we've shown you how to set up previously. You'll notice that the blades are really thin, which should indicate that this step is all about precision, technique, and a really light touch. It's not at all about brute force. I recommend using the 2/0 size saw blades that we've sent you in your kit. They're the thinner ones, and they'll be much better for these thinner rings. We'll also be using our jeweler's bench peg and safety glasses. You must be using safety glasses for this step. You want your bench peg with the slope facing upwards for this step, so it's a little bit easier to hold onto your wire. Position your metal so that the black marker is at the tip of that V channel carved into your jeweler's bench peg. Once in position, with your non-dominant hand, hold your metal downwards into the bench as close as you can get to the black marker without covering it. To begin your cut, line up your jeweler's saw over the top of your black marker, and we're going to start with some push strokes, pushing your saw frame up and away to create a little groove in the metal. This is going to stop your saw frame from sliding left to right. Once you've got a little groove, you can then start to saw back and forth. Sawing is a fundamental skill for all jewelers, and proper technique is going to save you a ton of time and effort. So make sure you're watching this next step nice and carefully. With sawing, the most crucial tip I can give you is to use a really, really light amount of pressure. I'm not pushing into the metal whatsoever. Imagine that you're using a bread knife through a loaf of bread. It's not at all about trying to push through and downwards into the bread. It's all about the back and forth motion of the serrated bread knife. Think of sawing with a jeweler's saw the exact same way. I'm not trying to push through the metal. Any pressure directly inwards is only going to slow me down. It's all about using a really light touch and using the serrated teeth of our saw to do all of the work. You want to be using nice long strokes. Use the full length of the saw frame and try to keep things as steady as possible. You want to keep your frame straight. Any sort of angling like this or like this or like that is going to cause the frame to jam up or to give you an uneven cut. Using that steady motion, try to focus on moving your saw frame up and down. It's not back and forth like a steak knife, it's much more up and down. If you do jam your blade up, don't try and release it with force. Instead, gently find the angle that you were cutting at before and start again. During this process, you'll need to hold your silver or your material down firmly into the bench peg to stop it from moving around and make your cutting a lot easier. Hopefully your cuts are nice and straight, but if you're anything like I was when I started, they're going to be a little bit dodgy. So before we move on to the next step, we're going to file them nice and flat. You may notice that your cuts either aren't quite straight or there's little tips of metal sticking out at the end. To remove these, we'll be using our needle files. We've given you 3 needle files in the set, and the one I recommend using for this step is the flat side of your half round file. You'll notice that one side of this file is rounded and the other side is just dead straight or flat. Holding your silver at the edge of your bench so that just one edge is slightly hanging over the lip, we'll be using this straight surface to guide our filing and make sure that our filing is also nice and straight. To file, we're going to be using firm push strokes away from ourselves, just over the edge of our wire to remove any burrs and make it nice and straight. Our next objective is to get this end and this end of the wire to meet up really nice and flush so that in the following step, we can solder it together. To bend our wire around, we're going to be using our round nose pliers. This is the pair with the rounded conical shaped tips. Start right at one end of your wire, about 3/4 of the way down your pliers, like so. Then using the pliers and rolling your wrist, we're going to start to create a little fish hook in the wire, like so. Once we've got one fish hook, we're going to do the same thing starting from the other side of our wire, bending it up and around towards our original bend, like this. What you'll often find is that you have this big gap between the ends of your 2 fish hooks. And like I said earlier, we want our two ends to be really nice and flush up against each other. So the way we remove the gap between our two pieces of wire is by overlapping them. You'll notice that I grab each side of the wire and overlap it past where we eventually want them to sit, which is here. I'll grab each side, and as I push the wire past each other, I'm creating tension in each side so that they eventually want to rest sitting past each other. Once they're resting here, we'll slowly pull them out until they click into place with a bit of pressure. This way they're kind of butting heads and that gap between them is all gone. The way I like to explain this next step is by imagining that these two pieces are the two main characters of your favorite rom-com. What we're trying to get them to do is have a nice long movie star kiss, but before our characters are going to go anywhere near each other, we need to develop a little bit of tension in the wire. By grabbing one side and pushing it past the other side so that they're overlapping, like so, we're going to let the wires rest overlapped before pulling them back out slowly until they click into place. Now you'll notice that there's no gap in between the two ends of my wire, but they're not sitting particularly flush. So the last step of the process is to level our wire out and make them sit super duper flush. Again, going for that movie star kiss. My hot tip for this step is to level off or flatten out the wire. So instead of joining at a point, they're joining really nice and flat. I'm going to grab the wire a few millimeters away from the edge and slowly angle it until each side is really nice and level or flat. From there, it's all about fiddling around. You can use your fingers at the last step until your wire is sitting super, super flush and flat at the join. Take your time with this step because the better your join is and the more flush your two pieces of wire, the stronger and more seamless your ring will be. Rotate the ring around in your fingers to make sure on every different side it's all nice and flush. And don't worry about the shape of the ring for now. It's not supposed to be round, and we're going to be rounding it out after we've soldered the join together. So don't worry about making your ring round at this stage. You're looking out for any areas of the ring that aren't quite level. Things like the metal being slightly off or not quite flush on one section, or any visible gap between the two pieces of metal. The solder is going to act like a glue. It will hold things together, but it's not going to fill gaps or build bridges between things. So we need our wire really tight and flush. The longer you spend getting your joins right, the better quality your rings will be, and the less likely you'll have issues with soldering in the next step. So take your time with it, practice, and don't move on until you get it right. If no matter what you do with the wire, it just doesn't seem to line up without a big gap, you may need to go back to filing and sawing to make sure both edges are nice and straight. Okay, so our ring is now ready to solder together, which essentially means we're going to be gluing these two ends together to stop them from breaking open ever again. We'll be using wire solder for these rings, and we'll need to prepare the actual wire before we use it. To prepare your solder wire, you'll want to hammer it nice and flat and then cut it up into smaller sections. So grab your wire, straighten it out with your hands, and to stop it from rolling around, we'll then be hammering it with our ball peen hammer, the flat side, to flatten the wire into smaller, more manageable sections. With the wire lying flat on the steel, simply take your hammer and start to hammer it flat. Taking the side of the wire that you've just flattened out, we can then cut it into smaller pieces for single application with individual rings. You can do this using a number of different things, but a pair of household scissors will work just fine. We want to cut our solder up into around sesame seed sized little sections so that we can then apply each of them individually for our rings. Alternatively, you could also practice more with your jeweler's saw and use that to cut it up into your smaller sections. Make sure you're sawing with care because the pieces are going to be quite small and tend to fly off after they've been cut. Collect them up after you've cut them and they should pile up. With our solder wire prepared, we're now ready to solder the joint of our ring. Soldering is a really important technique for jewelers, so again, this is a step you'll want to listen and follow along closely. Start by applying one chip of solder to the middle of your ceramic board. You can fine-tune its positioning using your soldering pick to move it until it's sitting right in the middle. Then pick up your ring and place it down on your soldering board so that the joint of the ring is lying directly on top of your chip of solder. Again, you can use your soldering pick to fine-tune the positioning of your ring and solder. You want both of them facing directly towards you, as this is the section of the ring which we'll be watching really closely in the next step. Next, we need to apply flux to the joint. This is your vial of liquid flux. Carefully open it up, avoiding any contact with your skin, and using a paintbrush that you have at home, and carefully apply a couple of drops of flux to the joint. Remember that flux is an acid, so make sure you're following the safety instructions on screen now. We're now ready to solder our ring together using our butane torch, which we've showed you how to operate previously. When you're soldering, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area or are using a dust mask to prevent inhaling any fumes. In this step, we're going to be heating our piece up really nice and evenly until we reach the melting temperature of our solder. Solder is made up of a mixture or an alloy of your sterling silver, which is the wire in front of you, but it's been mixed or alloyed with another metal that has a much lower melting temperature. The idea being is that as everything heats up, our solder is going to reach its melting temperature much more quickly. It's going to melt into our joint, and that's what seals things together and stops our ring from breaking open. Before you turn your torch on, make sure any long hair is tied back, you're wearing your safety glasses, and your ceramic board is nice and clear with a bit of breathing space around your work area. Make sure you've got a glass of water nearby before we get going. Start by turning your torch on and up all the way. Then you want to begin to heat your ring up evenly using the tip of the inner blue flame. Do so by going in nice, slow circles all the way around the ring. As you do so, the only thing you need to watch is that little chip of solder. Remember, we're trying to melt it in this step, so patiently wait and watch for our solder to reach its melting temperature. You'll see it jump into your joint once it's reached temperature, and that's all the heat you're going to need. So turn the torch off, use the flat nose pliers to grab the ring and quench it into the glass of water. After you quenched it in the water, it will be nice and cool to touch, but don't set it back down onto your ceramic board because this will still be nice and warm, and that will transfer heat back into your ring. Instead, just lay it on the table beside you, and then we're going to do what we call the pull test to test our joint. To pass the pull test, what we're going to do is try to rip open our joint from each side, grabbing our ring with our fingers and simply trying to pull it apart nice and strongly. If our solders worked correctly, we won't be able to pull it open. At this stage, we're not worried about any cracks or gaps. We're just worried if the ring is pulling apart. If when you do the pull test, your joint breaks apart, don't stress. I'm going to show you how to prepare it before repeating the same steps and resoldering the joint together. We're going to want to make sure that we clean our joint up. So start by filing the edges back nice and flush. Use your bench peg to hang onto the ring, and the technique we showed you earlier to file the edges nice and straight once more. Once the joint's nice and clean and your edges are straight, you can put the ring back together using the steps we've shown you earlier to get your joint nice and flush once again. From here, simply use another chip of solder and repeat the soldering steps. When you're heating your ring up, you need to make sure that the entire piece reaches a nice even temperature. So make sure you go in nice slow circles all the way around. Otherwise you risk your solder running to one side or the other. Once our ring is soldered together and not coming apart, we can now round it out and get it to fit our finger. To do so, we're going to be using our ring mandrel and a white nylon hammer. You'll notice that your ring mandrel has the Australian and UK ring sizes written down it. So hopefully when your ring is completely round, it should land covering your size. Put your ring onto your mandrel and drag it down just with your fingers to start off with. You'll notice that the metal is still quite soft after being heated up and will go quite far down the mandrel without being hammered. Once it's not moving any further, we need to get our hammer involved. I recommend holding onto your mandrel in the following grip. Use the bottom 3 fingers of your non-dominant hand to hold onto the mandrel nice and firmly, and the top 2 can pinch either side of the ring and pull it down gently to apply some downward pressure to the ring. Once you're in this position, you can then also rest your mandrel against your stomach or sternum to give it a little bit more support. Then grab your hammer and start to knock the ring and roll or rotate the mandrel in your hands to make sure you're hammering each side of the ring nice and round. Once you've done it on one side, grab your ring and flip it over and repeat again on the opposite side. This will counteract the conical shape of your ring mandrel, but is more important for wider bands. You'll know it's time to stop hammering because your ring will have dropped down onto your ring size, or when you look down at it, you'll notice there is no more gaps between the ring and the mandrel, and the ring is really nice and round. From here, you can take it off your mandrel with your fingers. If it's stuck and won't budge, simply point your mandrel down to the table and hammer it off with your hammer. This is a great time to check the ring size on your finger if you're making it for yourself to make sure it's feeling comfortable. If you need to stretch it up or loosen it, simply put it back onto the mandrel and give it some more oomph with the hammer. Once you've got your ring to your desired size, you may notice, especially with these thinner ones, that there's a little bit of warping. As you twist it in your fingers, you may notice that it's slightly waved or warped. And if you'd like it dead flat, we're going to flatten it now using our steel stamping block. Put your ring into the middle of your steel stamping block and hold down one side of it with your fingers. You can then hammer the other side of the ring and roll it or rotate it as you go to make sure all sides of the ring are nice and flat and level. Be careful not to hit your fingers in this stage because it will hurt. We're now ready to clean our rings up, and we're going to do that in 2 different steps. We've got filing and then we've got polishing. With filing, we're targeting just the join of our ring. We don't need to file the whole thing. We're just focused on this join. We're going to use our files to remove any excess solder that's built up from soldering, to remove any seam or gap in the ring, and also to make sure it's nice and smooth to the touch as we run a finger across it. After that, we'll be moving on to polishing, which is where we'll get rid of all the dark oxide that's formed on the surface of your metal during soldering. We'll once again be using our half-round file for this step, with both a flat and rounded side to it. You'll be using the flat side of your file on the outside of the ring, and then using the rounded side on the inside of the ring. This is to retain the rounded profile on the inside of your ring. With the flat side of your file, we want to be doing firm push strokes. The teeth of our file cut on the push stroke, so this is what we're going to be focusing on. Use your bench peg to support you as you start to push your file away from yourself over the join. You want to try and roll your wrist as you do this to preserve the round contour of the ring. Continue until the ring is nice and smooth to the touch over the join, or until it's absolutely seamless. Then flip the ring over and use the other side of your file, the rounded side, to begin the exact same process on the inside of your ring. Again, we want something that's nice and smooth to the touch, or something that's completely blended together. Once you're happy with your join, it's then time to move on to polishing the ring. Once again, the objective here is to return the surface to a nice bright finish, or just at least to remove all of the grey oxide that's formed on the surface during soldering. With the sandpaper that you've picked up from the hardware store, you have a few options. You can start to use the emery stick that you would have made at home, or you can simply use your hands to start to scrub the ring surface up. When polishing with sandpapers, you want to start with the roughest or the coarsest grit. This will be the lowest number on the back of the sandpaper, and work your way up through the grits systematically to improve the finish as you go. To help polish the inside of your ring, it can be helpful to wrap some sandpaper around your mandrel, then put your ring over the top and spin it to get the inside section of your ring. Polishing by hand does take time, but it is rewarding. You need to spend enough time at the lower grits so that your hard work pays off later on. Stick with it and work your way up the series until you're at 1200 grit sandpaper. Then you can move on to the polishing papers that we've provided. These papers are even higher grit than 1200, and you'll notice they're a lot easier to bend and fold in your hands, which makes polishing even easier. However, they are very, very high or fine grits, so you can't jump straight into them or you'll wear the paper out really quickly. We've numbered the papers in our kit 1, 2, and 3 in order of coarseness. So start with number 1 and work your way up in the same system, making sure you're using the side of the paper that we haven't numbered. This is the rough side, and that will do all the work for you, whereas this side is smooth and won't polish at all. Repeat the process with the polishing papers, working your way up the grits as you improve the finish of your ring. After polishing with your sandpaper and then finishing with your finishing cloths, your ring should be really nice, bright and shiny. To finish it, we're going to apply some rouge with the final cloth to give it an even brighter mirror finish. With this cloth, you want to start by buffing the silver surface with the red side of your cloth. This is going to be applying rouge, which is a polishing compound, to the surface. After applying the rouge, then polish off with the yellower side, which should give you a final bright mirror finish on your ring. So that's it. That concludes what could be your first ever ring, a really nice round wire stacker ring. We're going to be building on the techniques we've just taught you in our next tutorial video, where we'll focus on building thicker banded style rings in both half round and flat wire. So stay tuned for that.